It's so good to be here with you, Nikesh.
Hi, Nikita. How are you doing?
Good actually. Yeah, tired but good.
I worry this is just going to be two friends catching up and forgetting there's an audience as well.
I mean, it happened yesterday with Dinata as well, so it's fine. It's fine. I think it's nice when people can see two writers who know each other from before get into it. Let's hope we don't disagree.
I hope we do.
I'm going to start actually with my first question, which is just storytelling is one of the most fundamental parts of the human experience. So what does story mean to you?
I think for me, it's just the way I figure stuff out.
Yeah.
You know, I find that watching or reading about people, the stories are essentially about people, are about humanity, about the universal experience, for want of a better word or term. And I feel like stories sort of help me to kind of interrogate the world. I always think that any piece of fiction that I write, there's a question at the heart of it, that something that I'm wrestling with, and I just find that story is the best way to kind of have that conversation, because it's more often than not the answer is less important than it's the friends we made along the way, that kind of cliche.
I absolutely love what you just said about story over there, because fundamentally and from the very beginning of time, the way that we've got to know each other as people is through stories, isn't it? It's why anything we didn't understand, our ancestors didn't understand, they made up a story about it. There was a god in it.
Yeah.
You put a god in it. There was a god for everything, like Jeff, the god of biscuits. But yeah. So, what are the key mechanics of storytelling?
I mean, I always start with character. I think I'm fundamentally interested in people, and for me, stories that don't have interesting characters that just don't work for me. And so, more often than not, I tend to have some people in my head who I'm obsessed with or fascinated by or interested in. I just want to spend time with them, and usually the story emerges when I've got to know them better, and I've sort of figured out what they're yearning for. For me, characters are often yearning for something, and the best characters are the ones who you take them on a journey, and that yearning is, whether it's fulfilled or not, it just sort of teaches you something about the way people are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's really interesting, when I was reading the book, you talked about character building a lot, and creating compelling characters is one of the first things that people really struggle with, because they want to create perfect people, right? You don't want to have any conflict. That's the first thing I did when I was 16. I wanted to create a character that was essentially a Mary Sue. She was all of the things that I couldn't be because I was a flawed human being.
Yeah.
And I created the most boring stories ever. So how do you create compelling characters?
Well, the best characters are messy. The best characters are complicated. This may be a stupid example, but I always think about Thanos in the Avengers Infinity War film. He, on the one hand, he is the worst villain ever.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, he kind of has a point. The universe is over-resourced, and it is overpopulated, and we are running out of resources, and sure, he's got a bad way of going about it, but he kind of has a point. And I think the best characters are the characters who may make bad decisions for seemingly righteous reasons, or may make good decisions. But sometimes bad people make good decisions, sometimes good people make bad decisions. I think the best characters are the ones who are surprising. They're the ones who don't do what you'd expect. The best characters are the ones that, Connell, just tell Marianne how you feel, all that kind of stuff. You could have saved us 200 pages. But actually, spoiler alert, when he does tell her how he feels, we're sort of slightly frustrated with them because it's taken them so long. But actually, it feels very real, because so much of their inability to communicate is what drives that story. I'm talking about Normal People by Sally, which is a novel I love a lot.
Yeah, Normal People was a great novel because it kind of really focused in and zoomed in on those flaws that all of us have. And like one of our biggest flaws as human beings is not being able to communicate with other people properly. And I suppose that's where conflict comes from, right?
Yeah. I think I often say this to writers that I'm working with. When it comes to conflict, I think that there's always this compulsion to fill stories with like exploding meteorites and like big fighty scenes, and actually sometimes a 3-second silence can be the most painful thing that happens in over the course of a book. And it has to be really important for the characters, and there's often like a real schism with characters between what they think they want and what they ultimately need, and it's your job as like the puppet master author to kind of point them in the direction of the things that they need.
And this is like specifically for like young writers. I feel that young writers are very scared of conflict because they've seen so much conflict in their lives already that they want to write something that doesn't have that conflict. And sadly with storytelling, that is the first thing like you have to learn, is like you've got to create problems for your character, almost to the point that the odds are against you.
I do worry that has become like a very Western sort of. There's a Kurt Vonnegut YouTube video where he talks about the shape of stories, and one of the stories he talks about is called Man in a Hole. He draws a line like this and he says, man in a hole. Man finds himself in a hole and then through a series of obstacles finds his way out again and is better off for the experience. And I sort of feel like so much of Western storytelling is based around this sort of man versus world. Man must reshape the world to fit who he wants to be. And when you think about storytelling mechanics that are used elsewhere in the world, you sort of realise that, I'm going to butcher the name of this, but there's a Japanese novel technique called Kisho Tenketsu. I think I've got that wrong, but it's not about conflict. It's about building a character and exploring who that character is before you then turn the plot on its head about 2/3 of the way through. And I think that like this focus on like creating conflict in novels, I think is sort of driven by a lot of TV writing, which sort of hinges on like lots of conflict being thrown at the characters in order to have multiple episodes. And I don't know if that always feels true.
I wonder though whether the reason why people like watching conflict or reading about conflict is because our own lives are so full of it. And it's a natural. My friend who is a massive gamer said to me that the only way that you know you're going in the right direction in the video game is because you keep coming across enemies. Which I thought was a really brilliant way to explain it.
Stealing that.
I did, so it's fine. But yeah, he said this, and it did kind of light bulb me a little bit, because you and I both love Spider-Man, right? And Spider-Man faces a lot of he faces villain after villain, but he deals with them like in a very amusing way. Like there's always like laughter, even though he's like beating them up. But there's laughter, and then he gets beaten, and there's laughter. And he has a really tragic backstory, and I think that's what's so lovable about him.
Look, are we going to talk about Spider-Man? Because I am happy to. I think the thing that I really love about that character and why that character has just endured for 2/3 of my life, probably more than 2/3 of my life, and I've read those comics since I was 9 years old, is because it's the ultimate wish fulfillment. You have this kid who has this really tragic story and really can't get out of his own way in his normal life. He gets the opportunity to put on a mask and be someone else. And not only can he be the strongest guy in the room, but he's also the funniest as well. And it's the quips that make him such a brilliant character. I mean, Batman is essentially quite dull because he just solves the crime, and he's never said anything funny in the history of Batman.
Yeah.
But
he is a grouchy guy, isn't he, Batman?
He's a very grouchy, wealthy guy.
Yeah, he just is. Like, this is why I feel like whenever they pair him up with a funny character, it's extremely funny, because that speaking of character building, when you put a really grouchy character together with a really funny one, and you just get like absolutely brilliant stuff out of that, don't you? Because they're so different from each other.
Yeah, that's why like the buddy like road movie pairing is always like it always works really well. You have someone you know have two people who are like an old married couple. You have the one person who's very practical and the one person who's very chaotic, and by the end of the journey the practical one will embrace chaos and the chaotic one will know how to do a bit more admin or something, and that growth, but it is earned by them sort of butting heads at every opportunity.
100%. Like, it's so funny because I actually posted William Carlos Williams' The Red Wheelbarrow, and Mary Ruffle has done a really funny response. I can't do it here because there's a lot of swearing in it, but it's like essentially a poem with like 5 lines where she basically tells him off for paying attention to the wheelbarrow, and now everything is dirty and he's just left the wheelbarrow out there. And it really sounds like an old married couple like arguing with each other. And that's brilliant. Like, that's... People talk, I think there's a negative connotation to conflict because of the westernized version of conflict, but like just that in itself is a conflict, isn't it? Like when you have these two people who are so different from each other in a room together, and it could create a lot of comedy.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is based around, you know, trying to navigate difference, right? You know, you pull people into the sort of the binary extremes of their personality, and then you put them in a confined space and you put them under pressure, and through that you want them to come together in a way that, you know, it's like a wish fulfillment to see that like people with very different vested interests can come together when pressure is applied to them.
100%. That's why I like the last Spider-Man movie, because at some points he had to work together with his like worst enemies, which was fantastic. I'm not going to spoil that movie for you. You need to go and watch it. Nikesh and I both love Spider-Man for loads of reasons. So this book is all about kind of finding your voice and telling your story. And one of the hardest struggles is to find your unique voice, where you're not sounding like other people. You sound like yourself. You're not sounding like, you know, say Hanif Qureshi, or not sounding like anyone else. You sound like you. How did you kind of find your voice and what you wanted to talk about?
I think it was by trying to sound like other people and realizing that it just wasn't true. You know, when I first started writing as a teenager, I was writing my own comic book like scripts, and I was writing my own rap lyrics, but I was just parroting what I was listening to and what I was reading, and I hadn't sort of worked out what I wanted to talk about. And I spent a long time sort of thinking that the way to write was to sort of do what other people were doing, and that was going to be the thing that would sort of get me published and all the rest of it. But actually, it was you know, it was only when I started thinking about what I wanted to say and what I was curious about. I do think that the best writers are the curious ones, the ones who don't have any of the answers. I read so many articles and essays at the moment where people present an answer to you and they try and de-messy the world, and actually for me the world is messy, and that's where I like to be. That's what I like to kind of spin around in, and the best writers are the ones who kind of write towards that curiosity.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's really interesting is that this book, most of the books that I've got on writing do focus on publishing. But with this book, you focus so much on story and craft, and I have a real appreciation for what you've done with it. In fact, get the audiobook, because Nikesh has narrated the audiobook, and I was sitting with the audiobook in my ears, and it's fantastic. It's so animated and so lovely. So,
oh my God, it was painful to record. Like, I've never done my own audiobook before because I've heard my voice. And I was like, no one needs to listen to this for 9 hours. That would be really dull. Monotone.
No.
But because the book is very much in my voice, that, you know, my publisher said, would you read it? Because I was just recording it in someone else's studio with a producer down the line, and no one in the room with me, and I felt a bit mad. I just sort of, it's a very silly audiobook.
I completely disagree with everything he just said.
I invent my own jingles, I sing all the chapter titles,
it's great.
I have little stings, it's really silly.
But that's what's so great about it. Everybody go and get this audiobook is all I'm saying. It's fantastic.
But I can't remember what your question.
Don't put yourself down because I will fight you.
I mean, people have paid money to see us fight. No, I'm joking. So what was it?
I was just praising the audiobook, but mainly what I was talking about was, we spoke about the key mechanics of storytelling and how important is story to you specifically and how to find your voice.
Got you. Yeah, so the reason I wrote that book was because I'd spent so long trying to find my voice, and I read a lot of books about writing. I listen to a lot of podcasts about writing. I'm a very interesting guy, and one of the things that I noticed about all of these things is there's so many resources out there on how to write a very well structured thing.
Yeah.
And it kind of it made me realize that structure is important, but the thing is, if you lack voice, then you can have a very well structured book that's kind of boring. But if you don't know anything about structure and you just write towards that voice, you can have a book that's filled with heart, but it doesn't really go anywhere. And so the best writing is a writing that kind of strikes an alliance between structure and instinct. And I didn't think there was enough out there on how to hone your instincts and trust your instincts and think about. So in the book I talk about how to try and utilize your inner critic for good, because we all have an inner critic, and it's probably useless pretending we don't have one or ignoring it. There's lots of stuff for people who want to write but don't know where to start, all those kinds of things, and that was basically because I just hadn't seen anything else out there that was sort of trying to talk about instinct with the same reverence as structure. And I thought, for me, that's probably the most important bit. When I teach a 6 month writing a novel course, and one of the things I try to do is spend a lot of time getting my writers to think about their instincts.
And when you say, one of the things that you say in the book, which comes down to instinct as well, is why am I telling this story? That is very much at the heart of the book. You say it twice over this, across 2 chapters. And I think that is such an important question, because if a story comes to you, why do you want to tell it? Why do you think you're the right person to tell it, right?
Yeah, because I think I don't think we read in a vacuum. I don't think we read objectively, and I don't think we write objectively. I think we read subjectively and we write subjectively. We project ourselves onto the stuff that we read, and I think writers writers have a lens, they have a worldview, and that informs how they write the thing. If I asked the writers in this room to write down 5 things they noticed about me and Nikita on stage, you probably would all write down 5 different things based on things like your worldview, what you're interested in, what your eyes are drawn to. Or if you wrote the same things, you might have the specificity of detail. One of you might write down that Nikesh is wearing a shirt that really needs an iron, and that might say something about your worldview. Or one of you might go, oh, he's wearing a chambray shirt because you're fancy. So just little details like that show that depending on who we are, it changes the lens through which we see the world. So much of writing is about what the writer notices, what they then curate, and what they then choose to omit.
Yeah. And
how they choose to describe it. I remember, I'm about to do a really pathetic name drop here, I'm so sorry. I was having dinner with George Saunder once, and he's a lovely guy. And he was talking about, I asked him about editing, because why wouldn't you ask one of the best writers who ever lived about editing? And he told me this story. He said, take the sentence, Dave walked into the room and sat on the blue sofa. He was like, okay, let's think about that as a sentence. Do we need Dave to walk into the room? Can Dave just be in the room? What do we get by the act of him walking into the room? Okay, so Dave was in the room and he sat on the blue sofa. Well, we don't really need to say he was in the room. Dave sat on the blue sofa. Was he already sitting, or does he sit down? Like what does that is there movement there, or is it a passive act of sitting? Okay, so Dave was on the blue sofa. Okay, so let's think about the sentence the blue sofa. You know, there are many shades of blue, and there are many types of sofa. You know, a blue sofa is quite a generic thing.
Yeah.
It's not specific at all. So now we're left with Dave was on the blue sofa, and that's a sentence that you would draw a line through. But the thing that always stuck with me was this idea of like, I think I'm going to do it with my next course. Is I'm going to get people to write about a blue sofa, because it's about so much about of writing is about specificity. There's someone was talking about what's his name, Jonathan Franzen, and saying that he's an expert at finding the universal in the parochial, and I think the best writers have this ability to be parochial and specific, and that is the thing that makes their work so compelling.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, I think, so there's a poet that I really love who wrote this line, and I've been thinking about it all day today because I knew I would be doing this with you. And the line is from Jack Gilbert, and he says, anything worth doing is worth doing badly. And I think that's a really powerful way of like telling like young writers that like do it anyway, right?
Yeah.
You may not like it the first time you write it, but you'll keep telling that story until you get it right.
Yeah.
You know, until you're happy with it, or happy-ish with it, because I don't think we're ever content with our own work.
No, never. Though I feel like this is attributed to Oscar Wilde, but I don't know if it is. But he once said, "A novel's never finished; it's only ever abandoned."
Yeah.
Which I really like. It's it's quite depressing, but at the same time, it's quite true. You know, I went to see they were having like a benefit concert for the Tricycle Theatre in Kilburn about 10-15 years ago, and they had all these amazing writers come out and read from their first novels, and Zadie Smith was there, and Hanif Qureshi was there, and a bunch of other people. And Zadie Smith came out with a copy of White Teeth, and she had a pen, and like you could see she was flicking through it, and she like done lots of crossing out, and she sort of looked a bit embarrassed. She said, "I haven't read this book in like 10 years." And I sort of feel a bit weird reading from it, and then she sort of spoke about like how if she could write it now, she would have written a completely different book. And you know, it's so that there just comes a point in writing where you just have to stop.
Oh yeah.
Because you could work on it forever, and that's kind of like the sort of depressing.
It is because I was thinking about the fact that like, someone asked me to do an event with Fierce Fairy Tales like recently, and I was editing Fierce Fairy Tales. It's been out for 4 years, and I was editing my book, which had been published 4 years ago, at like this. I said, well, what have I written? What kind of nonsense is this? But it's extremely funny because it's out in the world, right? And it exists, and I have to keep remembering that book helped people. And I can't sit and trash my own work, because those people could be sitting in the audience going, what? I liked it. Like, what's wrong with you?
Well, yeah, but their experience of it is their first experience, whereas you've sort of lived with it.
Yeah.
And I remember Ocean Vuong was talking on the literary fiction podcast about, he was sort of saying that, like, the best literature isn't timeless, the best literature is a timestamp. And I really like that idea, and I think that's really true. Like, so, you know, much as I look at my first novel and think I wish I could rewrite it, and it's out of print, and if it ever came back into print, I sort of would feel a bit like, I want to do it all over again. But it is a real timestamp of when I wrote it, so I kind of have to let it go a bit.
Meatspace was a beautiful book. Like, I really loved it. Also, didn't you do something very cool, like, with Meatspace? Like, didn't you do like a whole thing?
Listen, Tuesday the 14th of June, next Tuesday is when is it? It is the 6th anniversary of me and my friends and my cousin sending a lamb chop into space to promote Meatspace. There's a very funny YouTube video of, has anyone been to Tayab's in East London?
Yeah.
Best lamb chops in London, right? I know Nido Grill as well, yes I know. But, we sent a Tayab's lamb chop into space. You can watch the YouTube video of it. It's very funny. It was very silly. It's like the stupidest but also most fun thing I've ever done in my life. That's the thing I would like to be remembered for.
Not the writing, the lamb chop.
All of those people who sent pizza slices and donuts and croissants into space, we were first. We sent a food item into space first. What a waste of equipment. What a waste of internet. But it's not really. It's brought a lot of joy to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like my career highlight was being made fun of on Have I Got News For You by Paul Merton for sending a lamb chop into space. I was just utterly perplexed as to why anyone would want to do this. And
because it's fun.
And so you get made fun of by Paul Merton on Have I Got News For You, a show that I have watched since 1993.
I love that. And I'm sorry, I made you repeat this anecdote because I was like, I really want him to say it. I want him to talk about the lamb chop.
I don't talk about the lamb chop enough.
I like hearing about the lamb chop over and over again. It's really funny. So here's the thing, outlining a story, that's a big part of the book as well. And I think outlining a story has really taught. I used to be a fly by the seat of my pants writer, and I used to just kind of like just write whatever was in my head and see where it took me. But then I started working backwards, so I write the end of a story or end of a poem first, and then I go all the way back to the top and see what led me there. How do you think outlining a story is beneficial to writers?
The thing is, I don't know if it benefits all writers. Because I know there are some writers who really like to just go, oh, it's fun and games. I'm just see where I'm going, and that's the joy of it. And there are other writers who are very, very meticulous and have to plan everything out to a T. Like there is like a great lost novel of mine that I planned meticulously because it was a psychological thriller. It had to hit all these certain beats in a certain way in order for everything to work. And it was so meticulous. I had a really thorough story outline for it. And then when I sat down to write it, I was just frozen. I couldn't do it. In the abstract, it felt fine, but I just couldn't find myself in it. And so I just never wrote it, which is a shame because it was a really good idea. But I think it's because I sort of overplanned it. And I think people can overplan, and like the one thing that writers do is procrastinate.
Yeah.
About
100%.
And I do it all the time. Oh, I'm just gonna watch this week's Obi-Wan Kenobi as research. For what I don't know, but I really need to do it at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday.
I would love to see you write something for Star Wars. It'd be so much fun. Make it happen. Make it happen. Make it happen. So one of the hardest things that I kind of find difficult to talk about is characters that are hard to write, that have given you hell. And all of us as writers have like that one character that was extremely difficult to write. So who was that character for you, and what were the obstacles that you had to overcome to write them?
Oh, this is being live streamed, isn't it? I can't say it. I have to think of a proper answer. There's a secret answer, but I can't talk about it yet. But
will you tell me later?
You know.
Oh, I do know.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I'm writing a Marvel, but I can't talk about it.
No.
But it's really hard. Harder than I thought it was going to be.
So let's just say a hard character. How do you get over those obstacles to write that hard character?
For me, the hardest characters are the ones who I find inherently funny, because it's sometimes like knowing that you kind of need to give them some sort of dramatic story when you just want to lead them into chaos and make people laugh about them. There's the character of the brother in Meatspace, the brother Aziz. He has this sort of really bonkers story where he sort of goes off to New York to sort of find someone who is his internet doppelganger, because he's like a social media influencer, and it's going to be part of like a fun little social media thing that he's going to do. But it had to have a really poignant, dramatic payoff at the end. But he was such a fun, because he's sort of like my Super Hands, like the Super Hands character from Peep Show, and it would have been so easy to just write this really chaotic guy, and that would have been a lot of fun. But sometimes you have to write against the joke, and I didn't like doing that very much because I like writing comedy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like comedy is incredibly hard to write because everyone has such a different sense of humor. So you have to kind of hit enough notes for enough people to kind of like really get involved in it, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of comedy is born out of pain. There's this old Steve Allen quote that tragedy plus time equals comedy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like Peyton Oswalt did this amazing show after his wife passed away, and it was born completely out of grief, and it is probably the best, like one of the best comedy shows I've ever seen. Where it was he turned death into a funny thing, but he turned grief into a funny thing. I think that's really powerful to be able to do that, because like it's death and grief are two things that we fear the most. But the fact that he did that, I thought that was remarkable, really. So the inner critic, you mentioned the inner critic before, and the inner critic is like one of the reasons why the blank page is so intimidating for so many of us. What do we do when that's stopping you from doing anything that you want to do?
So the first thing I would say to writers is writing isn't always about sitting and filling up blank Word documents. Like so much of the job of being a writer, or the practice of being a writer, is just being in the world and looking up and noticing. And often what's noticed can like lead you down different paths of interrogation, and that's the fun stuff for me. Like I try and prolong the actual sitting down and writing to the last possible moment, because I just want to like experience stuff, or like I don't want to constantly narrate things. So I think like worrying about physically writing and doing the sort of murder she wrote of like tapping out on a keyboard isn't the only way to be a writer. So I'd say that first. The second thing, like often your inner critic is just a self-defense mechanism that I think that is sort of preventing you from allowing yourself to be vulnerable. So maybe the thing that you need to think about is like, what is making you feel vulnerable about this thing that you might want to write.
I think like that's the hard thing about the inner critic, is like how well it goes with imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Because like you've already got this inner critic, and then like the imposter syndrome kind of goes, it just takes it and runs, doesn't it? It's like, am I supposed to be a writer? Are they coming with the pitchforks? They're coming with the pitchforks. I'm going to be kicked out of like, they're going to unpublish all of my books. That's a thought I've had. They're going to unpublish all of my books and they're going to like kick me off the planet, which is completely normal thinking apparently for writers to have.
Yeah, but like, I think I seem to spend too much time like reading other writers and going, how do I do this?
Yeah.
And that's not me. Like I remember reading Lusted by Raymond Nanani, and it's such an amazing book and it's so brilliantly written. And I just like once when I finished it, like I kept thinking, how do I write like that? I really want to be able to write like that. And I tried, and it's like that's just her style.
It is her style. Yeah.
And it's not my voice, and like trying to emulate it is bad, you know. And so sorry, I just realised I'm completely not answering your question.
No, it's fine.
But yeah, like so I think for me, like it's always about just knowing what I want to do and what I'm interested in, and that being okay.
Yeah, I mean, like, and one of the greatest things about this book is the amount of writing prompts you have to kind of, which are really like accessible writing prompts. Like sometimes like I make this mistake, like where I make these writing prompts which are not accessible at all if you're like a new writer. And I find like all the writing prompts in this book have really kind of helped me when on days that I've not felt like writing. And that's incredibly hard. So this is a purely personal thing. What is your favorite writing prompt to give in a brand new room full of people? Like, what is your favorite writing prompt?
I'm going to say it knowing that there is one of my students in this room who knows how well this did not go when I made people do it. But I got everyone to I was basically like, okay, write about two assassins. they've arrived at the place to assassinate the person, tell us why they're there without them telling each other why they're there. Just to kind of, as an exercise in like getting people to write towards subtext and not talk about the thing that they're there for, but using other ways of like explaining plot. Like it was an exercise in like exposition and backstory. Yeah. It did not go well, but it's always quite fun.
I think so. I think that exercise that we did in a Zoom event was really cool, where you ask, you talk about the backstory of a photograph.
Yeah.
That's a really cool writing prompt, I feel, and like lots of people got lots out of that. But that's the best part about like the book, is that there's so many writing exercises that you can get into it, and I think that's really great. So this is like purely because I needed to ask you about this anyway, but pacing. I really struggle with pacing with it when it comes to my work. I know lots of new writers really struggle with pacing. I think part of it is you don't want to overwhelm the reader when you're propelling the story, but also you don't want to be so slow burn that people just lose interest.
Yeah. How
do you find that sweet spot?
Pacing is all about cause and effect, I think. I think so the way I explain it in class is pace is where decisions are forced on people and they have to make those decisions, make those choices, and those choices have consequences. So like the formula that I always give people is conflict occurs, which creates external consequences, which result in internal resolutions, which establish new reality in which conflict occurs, and so on and so on and so on. And that's how you kind of keep plot rolling, rather than worrying about sort of constructing drama, which people can spot a mile off when they're like, you needed like a boulder to crash into the apartment right now because you didn't know what else was going to happen. And sometimes that can be fun to sort of throw in those sort of big sort of coincidental leaps of faith. But I think the best pacing is always about cause and effect.
I think so. I write horror, and like one of the things that I love about writing horror is that the unseen terror that you can fill, like the reader can just use their imagination to fill in, that is really useful, and that really helps propel the plot forward. And I think for me, the struggle is like all my horror stories tend to go on like for about 4,000 words. So how do I keep the reader interested for 4,000 words in an unseen, unseen? And I guess it's this exercise that you have in the book, which is just, a character comes home and something's out of place. Yeah. Like what is it, and talk about it,
Yeah, sometimes it's just about having really small things having really big impact. Yeah. That's the thing that really excites me. And also like there is that thing in horror, like once you name the beast, or once you see the monster, it's not scary anymore.
No, it really isn't. And I think the thing is like when it's happening to someone that you care about, or that's the thing that I write most about, is like someone you know really well starts acting in a really creepy, very unusual way. Like I have this character who just keeps smiling, and he's not a smiley person. He just keeps smiling, like it just keeps creeping on his like girlfriend and smiling at her. It's really freaking her out. Like I
don't like it.
Yeah, I don't like it. No. That's why I liked writing about it, because it scared me. And that brings me to the next part. Like the things that scare you, or the things that, I suppose that is your voice, isn't it? Like you want to make it believable and authentic. It has to be the thing that scares you. It has to be the things that makes you laugh.
Yeah, I think so. I think, sorry, I just got distracted by someone tripping out there. Maybe my biggest fear is like getting distracted while people are looking at you. And we're supposed to be talking about writing with some form of expertise. I don't know, like, because I write a lot about grief, and I write a lot about people in pain, like that. That's why I kind of have to mask it up in comedy, because I don't want it to be overwrought. I don't want it to be overly sincere. I want it to feel light on its feet, even though it's dealing with weighty issues. And that's what I love about when people use genre to kind of talk about really big stuff. That for me is the sweet spot.
Yeah. And Interestingly, I find that like writing for an audience is incredibly difficult. It gets in the literature community, like people do like, excuse my English over here, they do shit on genre writers and writers that can write for an audience as though that's a bad thing. But I think that's an incredibly hard thing to do, to be able to write for an audience. Like romance writers do it so well, and like, so, you know, fantasy writers do it so well.
Yeah, and they're like, yeah, I don't know, I don't know why there is that snobbery. It's not like everyone has to like everything.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I find it really funny because like it's the same thing as like modern art and stuff, isn't it? Like there's people who dislike it, but they dislike it so viscerally they want everyone else to also dislike it along with them, and I find it absolutely hilarious. People like what they like. So what do you do? Like I've actually written this down and I'm looking at it and I'm going, I can't believe I'm going to ask Nikesh this question. But what do you do on the days that you hate everything that you write?
So every day.
Every day.
What do I do every day? I just plaster on a fake smile and plough through it one more time. I don't know. Like, I think a healthy hatred of what it is helps me to kind of want to make it better. I've started a new thing recently where. Before I work on the novel, I write some morning pages where I just kind of use it to rant about whatever's irritating me or annoying me or horrifying me or is bothering me. And that's the first thing I do. I do that at like 6 a.m. every weekday just to kind of like get it so it doesn't then infect the novel.
Yeah.
And that because the novel is in a very specific space and it's about a very specific thing, I can't have like whatever irritant of the day sort of infect that. And so I've started doing that, and I find that a really helpful way of just, you know, by the time I open the document with my novel in it, I feel like ready to do it.
Yeah, I think that's really great, but like as a poet, I just want to say like I put all of my irritants into the poetry. I had a housemate that was really annoying me, so I wrote a poem about him and it got published. So that was fun, explaining that to him. Sorry, Slim. But like, I think my last question, because 45 minutes are already gone, but my last question which I wanted to ask you was writing in different mediums. You know, which it's not easy, like writing it in book form and then writing, say, you know, like for screen or writing for. How do you navigate that? What's the differences?
I think there are more similarities than there are differences. I think I'm always utilising those storytelling techniques of like, you know, all of that, the stuff, whether it's a script or a non-fiction piece or a novel, it's like it's also character based. And because I care about characters, like I want to write interesting, fun characters. And so that crossover is the thing that kind of carries me through. Like writing a script is like there's a lot more technical stuff that you have to consider, and you kind of have to be specific without being wordy, and you know, or like directing on the page and all that kind of stuff, which can, and also you have to like invent brilliant back and forth sparky dialogue between two characters you don't really know because they've kind of not been personified yet. I think for me, like my big love is always fiction. Like my big love is always novels. Like I'm working on a novel at the moment and having just written a new YA which is out next March. That's my sweet spot. That's what I really love, and that's where I kind of put all the best stuff.
That's amazing though. Like I'm finding writing dialogue quite hard, like in a different format. But thank you for that. And I'm going to actually open the floor for questions.
Hi, I just wanted to talk to you about editing, what you were saying about editing. In the context of today and some of the talks that we've had, I mean, in one of them I was talking about how female authors, Bronte, Virginia Woolf, Iris Murdoch, never had children. And how do you think minority writers for a majority culture self-edit, and how much should they do, or should they not at all?
Well, I don't know if writers should self-edit for someone else. Like, you can only ever really write to your emotional truth, really. I don't think writers should write stuff that they think will get them more publishable. I don't think writers should write stuff that they think the publishing industry needs. I don't think they should write things for a majority audience if that's not the audience that they want to read the work. I think the best writers are the ones who sort of set their intentions, why am I doing this way? Why am I the best person to tell the story? Why do I need to tell it now? And who am I writing it for? Like that, those are the intentions that I get writers to set themselves before they embark on a project. The writers that I work with and mentor, and that helps them to just write what they need to write. Like I wouldn't want them to self-edit.
I think that's actually really powerful. I mean, no one should have to self-edit, not like that.
Hi Nikesh.
Hi.
Like you, I'm also working as an author and a screenwriter, and you tend to sometimes take different projects and get in a situation where you write many things at the same time. And sometimes, like one work sometimes bleeds into another, and it's professionally hard to juggle between because there's deadlines and all. How do you manage to do that? And is there something that you've learned which you say you should not do, something that you think that did not work for you, and maybe that's something you can pass on to other writers?
Sure. Like on a real practical level, I use a version of the Pomodoro method. So the Pomodoro method is like 45 minutes on, 15 minutes break, 45 minutes on, 15 minutes, or something like that. But I work on my novel at the same time every morning because that's like my labour of love. Like no one is really expecting a new novel from me or waiting for one, but it's something that I'm really compelled to write, and I'm really excited about it. And so that's the first thing I do because it's the thing I'm most excited about, and that's what I work on 9 till 10:30 every morning without fail. And then the rest of the day I can then bounce to different projects. But I find I can juggle multiple screen projects, but like if I didn't have that carved out time for the novel, it wouldn't get written.
You've both been talking about characters. I'd like both of you to mention one book which is filled with the characters which came alive in bone and flesh for you.
Oh, that's a hard one. There are quite a few.
You can mention a few.
I mean, it's very easy for me. I think The Buddha of Suburbia is one of the funniest books I've ever read. It's so mischievous that the character of Kareem is brilliantly complex and hilarious, and just when I've read that book so many times over the years, and each time I get whatever stage of life I'm in, I get something new from those characters, to the point where as I get older I'm starting to weirdly identify with the father. Apart from that, the two main characters in NW by Zadie Smith, well the three main characters in NW by Zadie Smith are also just because they feel so real and so lived, and I think it's such a special book, NW.
For you?
So there's two books. The first one is Palace of Illusions by Chitra Divakarani Banerjee. It is a phenomenal book because it tells the story of the Mahabharata from Draupadi's perspective. And it came out years and years and years ago. I was a teenager when I read it. And it really wrote the female characters in a way that I'd never seen them written before. And these are like mythological figures that I'd grown up listening about, and listening to. And Draupadi gets blamed a lot for the Mahabharata, and here she is like kind of taking ownership of her story. I think it's really powerful. And the second book for me is Dinata's Black Flamingo, which was written in such a beautiful way. It's a novel in verse about a young black drag queen, and it's so powerful. The character of Michael is so beautifully written. His friends are so beautiful. His family is so beautifully written. It's a really revolutionary book. It came out. It's a YA book. It came out 2 years ago. I want to say a year ago. 2 years ago.
2019.
Yeah, 3 years ago now. It's such a beautifully written book, and you want to see good characters. That is a great book to look at. Yeah. Thank you.
Book that just came out called The Lion and Mercy. And I have never read a book which has created so many characters.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
I've reviewed it in the New Indian Edition. It's a bit of an excessive review. But the Guardian has just done calling it a great modern novel.
Great.
I recommend it.
100%. Thank you.
Hi, my question is about kind of stories and finding your voice, and I'm just wondering, as South Asian writers kind of publishing in the UK, have you ever felt pressurized or kind of pigeonholed either by yourselves or the wider publishing industry to just tell stories about South Asian topics or things, and how did you kind of deal with that? Thanks.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't think I've always just written what I want to write. I guess because I'm interested in like things around race and immigration, that tends to have cropped up in some of the work. I do think there is like I do hear from a lot of writers saying that they feel like a pressure to write towards their identity or write about South Asian issues or what have you. And I always just say, write what you want to write.
Mm-hmm.
You know, tell the story that you need to tell. You know, and if it's a story that is populated by South Asian characters, and it's not a particularly political or story or what have you, then brilliant. We need more of those stories. I think there just isn't enough out there. I mean, I think like currently like we're in a really interesting crop of brilliant books coming out, and I hope it sort of stays that way. And it's great to see amazing writers of colour writing genre stuff like sci-fi and fantasy and crime, like Tasha Suri, and you know we had Vaseem Khan and Shribani Basu and Sonny Falero up here earlier, and writing like romance. There's a brilliant book out at the moment called Edgware Road that you should check out. You know, I feel like it's a really good time for a lot of these books. I just hope it continues, and I hope increasingly I don't hear that from writers, because they just look at what's out there and they go, I can write whatever I want, because that's all anyone's ever really asked.
I kind of have had a little bit of a different experience, because I was told to stop writing about Greek myths and focus on Hindu ones because I'm South Asian, which was a great thing to hear from someone in publishing, of course. And it was said with no idea like whether they were being like, you know, this is a slightly racist thing to say, that you look at one of the few brown women writing about Greek myths and go, why don't you focus on your own South Asianness instead? But yeah, that was that was painful. It was not fun, and I write about Greek myths very, very well, so I'm going to continue writing about them whether they like it or not. So, so yeah, the whole thing is just like the establishment will always try to pigeonhole you. You just got to like stand up to them, and at the end of the day, standing up to them works. That's how there's so many of us here now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we've got time for like one more question.
The last question of the festival. No pressure.
No pressure. This is why no one wants to take the last question.
Open for the next.
Oh, there we go.
I'm not a plum. But I just wanted to ask Nikesh about turning down the MBE last year. What motivated you? Did you get any flack for it? How did your family take it? And and yeah, well done. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a member of the Order of the British Empire, and I wasn't convinced that, you know, there's this sort of movement to change MBE to excellence, but I'm not I don't know if that would come with a conversation around empire. I mean, it sucks. It sucks to turn down an award that recognises your services to literature, because I fucking deserve it. Thanks. Rare bit of arrogance there.
No, it's true.
But yeah, I just couldn't square it with how I feel about the world. Yeah, of course I had loads of flack about it, and then I decided to. So I wasn't gonna publicly say anything, but then I saw that given what this government is, and they were sort of really celebrating how diverse this year's honours lists were, and I got really annoyed, and so I wrote a piece for The Guardian, and it then got sort of journalised in all of everyone's favourite right-wing newspapers, and there were people calling for me to be sterilised and stuff like that, which is kind of a very specifically weird thing to wish on someone.
What the hell?
I told my dad, and my dad was like, yeah, okay, I understand that. I can understand why that makes sense with your work. And then that evening he texted me a very long list of reasons why I had to take it, otherwise he'd be angry with me. Sorry, Dad.
I like that he thinks that would have worked. That's really cute. That he thinks that it would have worked.
Yeah.
I'll be very angry at you if you don't take this Empire Award.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm on the cool kids Wikipedia page of the people who turned it down.
Yeah.
So that's quite fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, me and Bowie. Yeah.
Benjamin Zephaniah.
And Benjamin Zephaniah. I don't know, it's just it literally wasn't that deep at the time. The email came in, I went, well, nope to that, and went about with my day. And then a bit later I was like, maybe I should just sense check this, and so I spoke to my partner, and they were like, no. And so I was like, yeah, okay, fine. And then that was about it. It wasn't really that deep. My instant reaction was, nah, that's it, I'm alright.
You're a lot of people's hero for turning it down, including me. I'm so happy.
Hold on a minute. I sent a lamb chop into space, guys.
Yeah, I know. We love that too. But turning down the MVE is a bit cooler, just a little bit. But yeah.
I very vigorously disagree with you.
He's very upset with me. We're gonna have words later, aren't we? Okay.
If you go to Tayab's, we're on the wall of Tayab's. There's a massive picture of the lamb chop, and
thanks, Num. This is the fun of having your friends in the audience. This is what happens.
I'm surprised that's the first thing he said.
I know. I was expecting yesterday. He told us to shush me and Anita.
Anyway, yeah, I'm on the wall of Tayab's, and that for me is the coolest thing.
Saying no to the Queen is slightly cooler. Come on. Yeah, thank you. We're going to have to agree to disagree. Okay?
We're going to have to.
I'm right. Never mind. Well, thank you so much, Nikesh Shukla, for being with us and telling us all of these amazing things.
Thank you.